Recording. Perfect. So on behalf of Amnesty International Group 133, which is based in Somerville, Massachusetts, I want to welcome everyone here today for Get on the Bus 2022. This is our third year going virtual with Get on the Bus. Normally, Get on the Bus is our day of action in New York City, where we bring activists from throughout the Northeast US and other places to join us for a day of human rights education and action. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have moved virtual, but we're really grateful for the opportunities that has afforded to bring in more activists and allies from around the world who wouldn't be able to join us in person in New York. So we are grateful to have you here today for, this is our 27th annual Get on the Bus. And today's event is going to focus on human rights issues in Sri Lanka, Tibet, China, Syria, and Ukraine. And we have a really stellar group of speakers, Amnesty activists and advocates who are here to join us to talk about these human rights situations around the world and what we can do to take action together to promote human rights, equality, equity, and justice. And before we launch in, want to give a shout out to our team from Amnesty 133. Our team has been really invaluable in putting this event together over the past 3 decades. Our co-host for the day is Anna, who is providing the music for us as we got started. Let me spotlight Anna. And really grateful for all of the Group 133 members who were part of the planning process for Get on the Bus. It's a labor of love for the group, spent many months planning. And so we're grateful that you're here with us today, but also for Amnesty country specialists and activists who submitted action proposals. We have a democratic process where we solicit action proposals from Amnesty activists, what they want to see focused on Get on the Bus. So choosing these human rights issues in Sri Lanka, Ukraine, Tibet, China, and Syria were the result of proposals that came in from Amnesty activists. And let's see. So our first action that we're going to focus on today is around the Sri Lanka and the Trinco Five case. Some of you know about the Trinco Five, but we're just going to show a short video that was put together by our next speaker, Jim McDonald, who's the country specialist for Amnesty USA, along with a small team, but just wanted to share some information about the Trinco Five. So let's see if I can make all the tech happen here. 1 second.
Justice for the Trinco Five.
Justice for the Trinco Five.
Justice for the Trinco Five.
The Trinco Five were murdered and no one is being held accountable.
On January 2nd, 2006, in northeastern Sri Lanka, 5 innocent students were shot by security forces.
Authorities have failed to effectively prosecute anyone for their murder.
This case is not a new one.
The case of security forces not being held responsible is a case we are too familiar with.
There are thousands of people subjected to human rights violations in Sri Lanka by government forces.
The same people that should be helping their citizens are hurting them.
Don't let the Trinco Five be another case left unfinished. We must bring justice to these boys. Say their names.
Ragihar Manoharan.
Ragihar Chandra.
Logi Lith Araja Rohan.
Tangatori Sivananta.
Shanmu Garaja Gajendran.
Say their names and fight for justice for them.
Call on the Sri Lankan government to effectively investigate and prosecute those responsible for these murders so that the families of the students may at last receive justice.
Great. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jim McDonald.
Check out this Verbo. Oh, man. Michael, they're your cousins. Look at me.
Sorry about that. Turn it over to Jim McDonald, the Amnesty International USA Sri Lanka country specialist, who will introduce our guest speaker. And Jim, you should be co-host, so you should be able to unmute.
Thanks, Kelly. As she said, I am Jim McDonald. I'm the Sri Lanka country specialist for Amnesty International USA. And I am pleased, happy to introduce our speaker for the Sri Lanka action, my friend and colleague, Tyagi Ruwan Pathirana. Tyagi is the South Asia and Sri Lanka researcher at Amnesty International. She holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Warwick and a Master of Laws degree in Human Rights from Birkbeck College, University of London. Prior to joining Amnesty International, Tyagi was the National Legal Advisor for the International Commission of Jurists. She also was a national research consultant with the Consultation Task Force on Reconciliation Mechanisms and a researcher with the Legal and Constitutional Unit of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Tyagi has also worked on transitional justice, enforced disappearances, reparations for conflict-related sexual violence, counter-terror laws, shrinking civic space, and memorializations. Without further ado, I'll turn over to Tyagi. Thank you, Tyagi, who's coming to us from Sri Lanka.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, some people not ready. Hi, thanks Jim for that lovely introduction. So yeah, I'm Tyagi. I mostly work on Sri Lanka as a researcher for Amnesty, as a part of the South Asia office, which is based out of Colombo. Maybe I'll just dive straight into the case. I think Jim's video kind of gives a good overview of what the case is about. What I'll do is I'll go into a little bit more information. So as the video laid out, so Ragihar Manoharan and 4 other Sri Lankan Tamil students, and that's why we call it the Trinco Five, were killed by security forces on the 2nd of January in 2006. And this happened in the eastern town of Trincomalee, and that's, that was one of the conflict areas at the time. And at the time, the government claimed that they were killed in a grenade attack, but later medical reports showed that the youth were shot at close range. After that, there was a criminal case that was filed against 13 special task force members, that's with the army, suspected of executing the 5 youth. But then by July 2019, which was just a couple of years ago, the suspects were acquitted, and that was due to apparently a lack of evidence. There's been a lot of international pressure, so thanks to that, the Attorney General has decided to reopen and recommence the investigations into the killings, but we've not heard of anything since. And just to sort of go into a bit more detail about the case, basically, at the time when this incident happened, this wasn't obviously an isolated case. There were a number of killings of this nature that have been reported, especially from Sri Lanka security forces. against a lot of Tamil individuals in the north and the east during the course of the war, which started in the early 80s. And then ended in 2009 in a very bloody end. So we've obviously noted the importance of an effective and impartial investigation into the killings, but that's not really come through. Over the past few years, what we've also seen is that there's been made some kind of efforts by government to facilitate witnesses to be able to give evidence around this case via remote means. So what they've done is they've made some changes to the law to be able for people who've already fled the country with significant evidence to be able to come to a Sri Lankan mission in any country and provide evidence. But I know Jim is in touch with some of the victims' parents, and so am I. They're still not comfortable because they've had to leave the country out of fear of repercussions for pursuing this case. So this change in the law has still not made it feel safe enough for victims and witnesses to come forward and provide evidence. And I don't think cases like Khashoggi help, where you go into an embassy and there's no sort of guarantee of your protection afterwards. So this is one of the fears that some of the victims' parents have, and which is some of the fears that also some of the witnesses who fled the incident and later the country have had around this. And this is also an obstacle about that's keeping the case from going forward, at least according to the Attorney General. But some of these witness testimonies have been made available for a number of years. So our call as Amnesty International has also been around trying to get the Sri Lankan government to change the law in order to make it possible and to facilitate for people who are abroad to not have to actually come to a Sri Lankan mission to give evidence, but to be able to do it at a remote location of their choosing and join in to a court proceeding via remote means. Because this would mean that people who are no longer in Sri Lanka, who don't feel safe to come into a Sri Lankan mission abroad to give evidence, to be able to still take part in the justice process. And these fears are very real. Because some of the one journalist who actually took photographs of the bodies back in 2006, he was killed a few weeks later. So the perpetrators of this incident, where 5 youth were killed, have been quite adamant that anyone coming forward fears some kind of repercussions. So this is sort of where the case is at, but since 2019 and where the Attorney General's office has decided to reopen investigations into the case, nothing has really moved forward because that was sort of earlier in the year, and by the end of the year, there was a change of government. So some of those who hold key command responsibilities for some of the human rights atrocities committed during the war are now back in power, including the current president, current prime minister, and even the army commander at the moment. So these are some of the practical difficulties that we're facing in making sure this case goes forward and there's some justice to the victims, and the families are still pursuing justice.
Thank you, Tyagi. I think we're back to you, Kelly.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyagi, and to Jim for that information. We put some links in the chat to the Trinco 5 online action that Amnesty International has, as well as the video we showed earlier. And we will continue to add information into the chat for actions that that you can take as part of Get on the Bus. We also, if you registered online, we'll be sending out the links by email after the event. But before we move on, I want to turn it back to Tyagi, because we asked Tyagi to talk about Trinco 5, but also the general situation in Sri Lanka right now. We know that that's something that's top of mind for many of us. And from your being in Sri Lanka, the insights that you could provide would be really helpful. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Tyagi, and I'll ask you, yeah, I think we can unmute.
Yeah, so the general context for pursuing accountability is very, very difficult in Sri Lanka, especially because of the kind of people who come back into power, but also the systematic dismantling of any kind of independent institutions and the judicial processes that would enable some kind of justice locally, which is why that the call for international justice has been key for victim families. So for example, in 2020, after the current government came into power, they passed a constitutional amendment that made appointments to key independent institutions like the National Police Commission, the Human Rights Commission, even appointments to lower judiciary, very dependent on the executive. So that means appointment processes as well as dismissal processes. So because of this, there was no, at the moment, there's not a lot of faith in the judicial process to be able to deliver any kind of independent verdict, especially where the current rulers are linked to them. So this is a huge, I mean, Sri Lanka's had a impunity and accountability crisis for a while, sorry. And I think it's just getting worse at the moment. And that's why at consecutive UN Human Rights Council sessions, there's been calls for an international hybrid kind of accountability mechanism. And so where we're at the moment is that the UN, sorry, dog is barking. Just a second. Sorry, yes. So after consecutive UN Human Rights Council resolutions, what's also happened is that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the UN, they've expanded their capacity to start collecting evidence for prosecutions for any state that's willing to take action against these perpetrators, given the situation that the domestic country is unwilling and unable to do so. And Sri Lanka is also not a party to the ICC, so that's another thing that keeps us progressing on the international justice front. So now we're looking at universal jurisdiction kind of options available. So because of that, the current Sri Lanka Accountability Project within the OHCHR is taking a lot of effort to collect evidence that's been made available elsewhere, but also with organizations like us. So it will have a repository of evidence available for any other state that's willing to try these cases. So that's on the accountability front, but I know Sri Lanka has been in the news for a number of other reasons recently, especially the economic crisis that's ongoing at the moment. So I'm not sure how much you guys are aware of it, but because of a series of bad decisions also made spanning several governments over the past decades or so, there's been a huge economic crisis that's happened at the moment, and we're experiencing power outages of about 13 hours a day some days. There's a severe shortage of essential foods, medicine, cooking gas, fuel. It's slightly similar to the Lebanon situation, but not as bad just as yet. And right now the government is trying to stifle protests because there's been thousands of people that's come to the streets demanding resignation of the government, including the prime minister and the president. It's kind of exciting and exhilarating in a way because these protests, which have started as a response to the economic situation has also now expanded. And you see ordinary people who've not ever been talking about accountability for human rights cases, including the Trinco Five, are now talking about it as we speak in thousands around the country. So it's an exhilarating time, but it's also a very dire economic situation where people are, sort of, there are risks and there are fears of starvation kicking in if international donors and international agencies don't step in. So that's just like an overview of what's going on in Sri Lanka. But while it is such a dire situation, it's also a time of huge opportunity for us to be able to talk about human rights when the domestic constituencies are actually listening and they're willing to talk about human rights and they're interested in learning more. So I'm really grateful that you guys are doing this, and I'm around if you have any more questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyagi, for those insights and for being with us. I know that it's much later for you than it is for us on the East Coast of the US. So thank you for sticking with us. We do anticipate that later on in the program that we will have some time for questions and answers. But in the meantime, feel free to stick questions in the chat. There's some robust conversation going on there. And also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you have a chance. So now we're going to shift gears to the second action that we're focused on for this year's Get on the Bus 2022. And it's our action focused on China, calling for accountability from the Chinese government, both for the calling for the end of mass detentions of Uyghur people, and including Ilham Tohti, the Uyghur economist and prisoner of conscience, and also calling for the release of Tibetan political prisoners, including Rinchen Tsultrim, who is a Tibetan monk who's been held since 2020. And to talk to us more about the human rights situation for Tibetans and other people being mistreated by the Chinese government, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and it will be Tenzin Miglay. Migs is works with Students for a Free Tibet, where she works as the North America Grassroots Coordinator. And I'm going to make Migs co-host. She can unmute, but we're really grateful for the collaboration for Students for a Free Tibet, their work that they do around the world on the ground with Tibetans, the Tibetan diaspora, as well as other groups working for justice and calling for the end of human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party. And I'll turn it over to Migs.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you, Kelly, and the rest of the Amnesty Group 133 for putting this event together with incredible speakers. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in today. It's testament to your character that you've chosen your time today to learn about human rights issues around the world. So as Kelly said, my name is Tenzin Miglay, or Migs. I'm a 23-year-old Tibetan activist who was born in a Tibetan refugee settlement in India. And I currently reside in New York, where I am the North America Grassroots Coordinator for Students for a Free Tibet. We are a chapter-based network of young people and activists around the world that campaign for the Tibetan people's fundamental right to political freedom. We engage in this work through education, grassroots organizing, and nonviolent direct actions. Most recently, a few months ago, I, along with other SFTers, actually traveled to Lausanne, Switzerland, where we chained ourselves to the Olympic rings outside the International Olympic Committee to protest the Beijing Olympics 2022. And interestingly enough, I was also a member of an Amnesty International chapter at my high school. So this is like a very full circle moment. But ever since China's illegal occupation of my homeland in 1959, Tibetans have been facing major repression and persecution by the Chinese state for merely existing. In Tibet currently, there are colonial residential boarding schools with Tibetan children, some as young as 4 years old, who have been ripped away from the arms of their families, forced to read, write, learn, play in Chinese, effectively being raised by the Chinese state. The complete media blackout inside Tibet has also made it impossible for us to bring these issues to the general public, including the pressing issue of political prisoners inside Tibet, who virtually have no rights or freedoms. One political prisoner we must talk about is Rinchen Tsultrim. Rinchen Tsultrim was born to a small nomadic family in Tibet, where he eventually became a monk at the Nangshi Monastery in Tibet. He was actually only a teenager when the 2008 Beijing Olympics occurred. And this, as a few of you may know, was a period of great unrest and protesting inside Tibet. Tibetans hit the streets to let the world know that China was committing egregious human rights atrocities inside Tibet and should not be given the honor of hosting the Olympic Games in the backdrop of genocide. And unfortunately, the Chinese government actually slammed the unrest by tightening their already impossible grip on Tibetans inside Tibet. And since then, there's effectively been an absolute information blackout inside Tibet. Most recently, on March 25th, 2022, Tsewang Nubu, a popular Tibetan pop artist inside Tibet, self-immolated, set his body on fire outside one of the most significant landmarks in Tibet, the Potala Palace. To help kind of put that into perspective, picture someone setting themselves on fire outside the Eiffel Tower, and yet to date, not a single video or picture being obtained from the incident. In fact, it actually took weeks to confirm that a self-immolation had even taken place, and even longer to learn that Tsewang Nubu had self-immolated, been taken into Chinese police custody, and died due to his burns. All this said to emphasize the immense power the Chinese government has in controlling narratives and silencing any dissidents before it can even escape from a single cell phone. As there have been many documented accounts of Tibetans being arrested for simply recording a self-immolation or sharing a picture or clip on social media. I just really wanted to emphasize that access to websites have been tightly controlled, and social media platforms have been especially closely watched. And anyone suspected of being involved in any kind of rebellious act is taken into custody because the Chinese government really doesn't want to take any chances. But obviously that's a complete infringement on any human's right to basic freedoms. So actually on July 30th, 2019, Rinchen Tsultrim on his online account, Syrian 1959, in Tibetan wrote, "The one who has realized the truth of morality speaks the wisdom of Buddha, the one who is the source of faith, the one who is the refuge of this life and the afterlife." And that was actually the last time that he posted on his profile and the last contact his family received from him. After this post, he disappeared. His family was concerned about his disappearance, but had guessed that he had been taken by the Chinese state for expressing political views on his WeChat account and personal websites. Because even before 2016, the cyber surveillance authorities had frequently been suspending Rinchen's WeChat accounts. And Rinchen continued to reconnect on social media and reopen an online account under the name of Syrian 1959. And in 2018, the Public Security Bureau warned him twice for his online social media posts, and his personal website entitled Skepticism on Tibet was also shut down. I think it just goes to, I'm smiling because it goes to show his resilience that even after being clearly like surveilled and harassed by the Chinese state, he continued to speak up and use his voice in an already really repressive situation inside Tibet. Rinchen Tsultrim was actually well known for his commitment to preserving the Tibetan language, and a Tibetan religious scripture that he had obtained from abroad by post was perceived as a threat, and its delivery in remote areas of Tibet was tracked by the post office. And then on April 25th, 2019, on the birthday of the 11th Menchen Lama, who was actually also disappeared by the Chinese government at the age of only 6, along with his entire family, Rinchen's cell phone conversation with Tibetans outside Tibet was monitored and recorded. His family knew all of this, and so when he disappeared, that was a general educated guess that they made, but at the same time, they were gravely concerned, rightly so, about the fact that he may be being held without access to his family, without access to legal representation, and that they could possibly never hear from him again. And worse, that he was being tortured in custody, which is not an uncommon practice for Tibetans imprisoned by China. Finally, it seems very weird to use the word fortunately, but finally, unfortunately, in December 2020, Tibet Watch obtained an official notice issued by Ngaba Police Security Bureau, dated March 23rd, 2020, stating that Rinchen had been charged with inciting separatism, a state security crime, a common charge pressed against Tibetans resisting assimilation to Han Chinese culture. And according to Tibet Watch sources, he was accused of publishing articles on Tibet issues on his WeChat account. And so the reason I say fortunately is because even though we're not sure of his exact whereabouts, the Chinese government has given us, I guess, proof that he is still alive. And during his disappearance, the Chinese authorities labeled his sister, who lives in India, as an activist in exile and actually began scrutinizing her actions. And after news of his whereabouts were shared to his family, in what we can only assume was an attempt to intimidate his family, specifically his sister, the Chinese authorities posted the photo of her detained brother on his WeChat account as a warning. And Rinchen's family is said to be under constant pressure from Chinese authority, his family both inside Tibet and outside of Tibet. And they've effectively been put in an extremely impossible position where even if they wished to advocate on his behalf, they're scared that anything they do might affect his conditions in prison. So I think this brings us to the question of what can we do as people outside of China and outside of Tibet for Rinchen Tsultrim. So given the, I guess I should also let you all know that he was actually officially charged and put in prison for 4.5 years. And so I just wanted to take a moment to kind of think about the fact that he was imprisoned for 4.5 years for simply sharing a post on his social media account. And if those are the charges being handed to Tibetans inside Tibet for an action such as that, it just goes to show just how extensive and repressive it must be inside Tibet. And so I think we really need to acknowledge how brave and how incredible it was that even with all this pressure, even as these things are happening, he still chose, I guess, to let his voice be heard, even given knowing that this is what would happen to him. Or, I mean, I don't know if he would have known it be 4 years. Sometimes it's longer than that. So I think it's just incredibly frustrating thinking about like, where is the accountability? He clearly should not be imprisoned at all. And yet he's serving a 4.5 year sentence. And given how ambiguous his arrest was, how are we to ensure that he will stay in prison for 4 years? Like, how are we to ensure that the Chinese state won't extend his imprisonment for whatever reason? It seems like currently they're using his exiled sister as a possible way to extend his sentencing. But that is just my thought. So sorry, back to activism for Rinchen Tsultrim. So, I mean, what can be done for all Tibetans and non-Tibetan political prisoners currently languishing behind CCP bars? Previously, the US Embassy in Chengdu, Sichuan province, had served as an unbelievably helpful and supportive site for Tibetan political prisoners in Tibet, where groups like Students for a Free Tibet could urge and write to the embassy to ask about Rinchen Tsultrim, or, for example, like another political prisoner's whereabouts, and ask, oh, can you please ask like the Chinese state, like, what is the state of this political prisoner? Like, are they alive? Are they being taken care of? Do they have legal representation? And adding, I guess, official pressure on the Chinese state and these local authorities on Tibetan political prisoners. Unfortunately, the US Embassy in Chengdu actually was closed last year. And that has been a really difficult and challenging transition for us as far as having some support in China for political prisoners in Tibet. But SFT firmly believes that embassies and consulate based in China can encourage greater transparency in cases like Rinchen Tsultrim's and possibly lead to a positive outcome, because they have in the past. Like direct pressure from US embassies in China have resulted in not necessarily reduced sentencing for Tibetans behind CCP bars, but in ensuring that they serve the sentence that they were given and not extended sentences, or sometimes they've helped in turning a death penalty sentence into a lifelong sentence, which clearly is not much better, but yeah. We also realized and recognized how important it is to increase global awareness of cases like Rinchen's, and shaming China for their mistreatment of human rights defenders can actually go a long way in achieving a more positive outcome for Tibetan political prisoners. So every person here today, we've effectively spent, at least 5-10 minutes saying Rinchen Tsultrim's name and talking about his case. And hopefully, you've learned something through this, and you'll take his case or his name to other spaces that you occupy. And that way, that's just another way that we can help kind of amplify his case and hopefully make some positive change for his situation. And that's why, in addition to capital and embassy level advocacy, SFTs constantly appeals to the international community, as Rinchen's case is so unique because he is a Tibetan monk and he is also a Tibetan language rights advocate. And at a time where China is trying so hard to close and destroy all these monasteries and destroy all these Tibetan language schools, his case in particular can be used as a vessel to kind of speak on these other greater issues happening in Tibet. And it's not fair that he's being arrested for what he believes in, which is that every Tibetan has a right to learn their mother tongue, and that he should be able to, get a religious document from abroad and read it and send it to other fellow Tibetans and Tibetan Buddhists specifically. And the arrest and sentencing of Rinchen Tsultrim actually takes place amid a renewed crackdown against the Tibetan people by the Chinese government. And I think my colleague mentioned it last year, but I'd like to mention it again this year, that on May 1st, 2021, the so-called ethnic unity law came in effect, which further undermines Tibetan identity and greatly endangers Tibetan activists living under CCP control. And I guess, as you can see, Rinchen Tsultrim's case is representative of the wider human rights issue and situation inside Tibet, but also around the world. Whew, okay, so thank you everyone who is here today intentionally. And if you're looking for more information on the Tibetan movement, I would urge you to go on our website, www.studentsforfreetibet.org, or join a chapter. We do have an SFT Boston. They've been recently revived, and they're led by a lot of really incredible, passionate young people. And they are on Instagram at SFT Boston. So if you'd like to be involved and you live in the Boston area, I would really highly recommend getting involved that way. If you live in the greater Massachusetts area, UMass Amherst also has a chapter of young people who are always looking for support. So if you'd like to start a community chapter as well, that's also a really great way to support Tibet. So I just wanted to end with the power truly does lie with the people, and we here really truly believe that together we can make a difference for political prisoners, abolishing death row, and stopping genocides going on in East Turkestan to the Uyghur people. And we can achieve so much through grassroots mobilization. And I don't want anyone to ever feel like their one action doesn't make a difference, because sometimes it makes all the difference. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Mix, for joining us. We're so grateful to you and to the whole SFT team for being such amazing partners with Get on the Bus and Group 133 over the years. So next, we just wanted to show a short video around Ilham Tohti. Last year, Juhur Alam, his daughter, was one of our guest speakers at Get on the Bus. Amnesty has been taking action to call for the release of Ilham Tohti for many years, and we want to keep up that advocacy. And I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to show a short video.
如果我可以称您为天空，没错，您就是我的天空，为我们撑起了一切。但愿我可以拥有一双有力的手，能为您拂去那遮盖你蔚蓝的乌云。The Chinese government always said that my dad advocated for violence. How you advocate for violence? Usually violence related to you hurt somebody, you use a weapon, you actually harm somebody. But my dad, yes, he did use a weapon. Well, his pen, but he didn't harm anybody. My name is Jawhar Ilham. I'm 22 years old. I'm currently studying political science and Arabic at Indiana University. The last time I saw my father was 2013, February 2nd, the day we were at the airport. People call him Mr. Tohti or Professor Tohti. He's a very intelligent man. He's a well-known economic scholar. He spent many years working on Uyghur people's human rights. Uyghur people are a Turkic ethnic group. They are recognized as one of the 55 ethnic minorities in China. Since 2009, my dad created a website, Uyghur Biz.
而且我认为，一个民族某一个阶段，并且这个国家的环境以言论获罪，短期一听的时候可能紧张，我有过，但我觉得这可能持续几分钟，甚至可能是几个小时。我唯一的牵挂就是母亲和孩子们。
He was my teacher, he was my father, he was like my friend. But now all his hair turned gray and he lost 20 kilos. When my dad got arrested, he was only 7. And then he always asked, "Where is Papa? Where did he go? Did he do something wrong?" For them, the disappearing of my father means there's no one to support them, since all our properties are confiscated by the Chinese government. And also at school, some students may call them in bad languages, says, "Oh, you don't have a father." I always try to find a way to be able to help him, but I feel like I'm so powerless. I'm too small. I feel like even I try so hard, I don't see any changes, and that makes me so frustrated. A person like him shouldn't be inside in the prison right now. I hope him can wait for me to rescue him from that place one day, and I'm sure one day he will be out.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing that video. We will continue to put action links in the chat, and as I mentioned, send them out by email. Next, we'd like to shift to the human rights situation in Ukraine and calling on the Russian government and human rights abuses in Ukraine. And I want to introduce our action coordinator for the Ukraine Action, Haley Norris. Haley is with the Providence chapter of Amnesty International USA local group 1016. And Haley is also the New England area coordinator for AI USA. So I'll turn it over to Haley to introduce our Ukraine Action speaker.
Hello, everyone. Oh, sorry, that's a really hard video to follow. As Kelly said, my name is Haley. I am so happy to introduce Alex Sarfoglu. He is the country specialist for Azerbaijan and Georgia, and he also serves on the AI USA Eurasia Turkey Coordination Group. And apart from his work with Amnesty International, he is a big journalist. He spent a lot of time in the South Caucasus Eurasia region and did a lot of reporting for BBC and Radio Liberty, among other huge names. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to him.
Haley, thank you so much. And I can't agree with you about the video, Anna. Thanks for sharing it. It's really impressive. First of all, let me start by apologizing in advance for any communication trouble you might have, because I'm currently traveling for work. I'm just headed to Poland to help my journalist colleagues to cover victims of the war, to conduct a few interviews with focus on children in particular, who were forced to flee their beloved countries due to the war. Now, 2/3 of children have already been forced to leave their homes, and most of them are now refugees, are desperately seeking shelter abroad. And an astonishing amount of victims, like I said, children in particular, are experiencing trauma that will hold them for the rest of their lives. And these are not just words, because the condition which they are in are not by any stretch of the imagination compatible with the term childhood. This is a war on people, the Ukrainian people, organized by next door country, Russia, the largest country in the world. Now, this war has a history. I'm sure some of you have already been able to follow Ukraine-Russia tension, but the further invasion that we are right now facing by Russia of Ukraine has inflicted unfathomable pain and suffering, of course, and forced millions of Ukrainian citizens already, and others. I've met with several others from citizens of different countries, of course, flee, seeking safety. Now, you've heard the world leaders, refer to this conflict as Putin's choice of voice for reason, because Russian leadership had all the other options available to avoid this path, but they chose this war. They chose this fight. The war has created, as I said, an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, where millions are not only turned to become refugees, there are also millions of IDPs inside the country. Many have, lost their separated, their family members. They have lost their homes and their sense of security, obviously. They likely, find themselves in an unknown places without familiar faces, and too often they don't even speak, the local languages, the countries that they end up finding themselves in. Members of ethnic or religious minorities, I would say, like third country nationals, including persons with disabilities, LGBTQ plus, community members, and other victims of discrimination are also among those particularly vulnerable to violence, including trafficking and other forms of violence during such a crisis. And I should also mention those estimated number of, I think they talk about more than 500,000 citizens of Ukraine who have been deported to Russia. A large number of whom were reportedly forcibly transported there. And these individuals are indeed at great risk of human trafficking, including forced labor and other crimes and human rights violations. There are also nearly 12,000, I would say, refugees in Belarus, which is also complicit in Russia's war on Ukraine. And in addition, there have been numerous reports of women and children who have been experiencing violence by Russian soldiers at combat zones. I've covered so many wars, and I was born in the Soviet Union. I read a lot of books, watched a lot of movies, but the history does not remember such atrocities since the time of Hitler. Russia has staged a real genocide on Ukrainian people. Just now, as we speak here, Russia is launching its missiles and destroying peaceful Ukrainian cities, including Kiev. Just imagine a country that is a member of UN Security Council throwing missiles to the capital city of another country, in which the UN Secretary General and his team are traveling in. Yes, that happened yesterday. Ukrainians are dying. Hundreds of thousands of children in Ukraine, they're currently sitting in their basements or bomb shelters. Look, it is spring right now in the region, and it's gorgeous weather, in that part of the world. But people, those kids I'm talking about, have not seen the sun, for more than 2 months. Millions of them are just wandering around the world. We must help, this wonderful people who are facing this unprecedented evil. Each and every single one of you have that ability. You can act, you can aid in this rescue. We can do this. So I'll say, let's help Ukraine together and let's save Ukraine together. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us and sharing those insights. Really appreciate all of your work and the work of you and your colleagues at Amnesty USA and Amnesty around the world to really bring real-time information and help us to take action together. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our fourth action for this year's Get on the Bus is focused on human rights in Syria, and in particular, the case of Rania Al-Abbasi and her family. And want to turn it over to our colleague, Michael Hart from Amnesty International Local Group 151 out of Boston and also around the world, to talk a little bit about Group 151's work on Rania's case, and also in time to introduce our next speaker. So I will make you a co-host, Michael, and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for having our group's long-term case file as part of Get on the Bus this year. It's a great opportunity for our group to get the word out to many more activists and increase the number of people that are working on this very important case. I'm one of the coordinators of Amnesty Group 151 Boston, and our group has been working on a Syrian case for a while now, the case of Rania Al-Abbasi, who was arrested and disappeared along with her family, her husband, and 6 children were arrested as well. Her youngest child was a mere 3 years old when they were arrested by government security forces. And these children are now having their childhood stolen from them, spending their lives in a Syrian prison somewhere, and no one has heard from any members of the family since their arrest 9 years ago. So our speaker, Rania Al-Abbasi, is going to be joining us shortly. She had an obligation right up until 1 o'clock, so I hope that she will be joining our chat very shortly, but I will tell you a little bit about her. I met her and her sister Hiam a number of years ago. Both are, they're from Syria, and both are devoted defenders of human rights and have been for many years now. And we're very lucky to have Ms. Al-Abbasi with us today. She is a board member for Justice for Detainees in Syria, which is an organization that is working to catalog the detainees that have been held in Syria, whether they're detainees of the government or ISIS or any other group in the conflict. They are working with people in the Syrian diaspora, as well as people that they know in Syria, to catalog all of the detainees in that conflict. And she is currently also visiting chair at the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. She is a member of the Syrian Women's Advisory Board for the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria. Ms. Al-Abbasi co-founded the Center for Civil Society and Democracy and is the co-chair of the United States Civil Society Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security. And she is also a senior fellow at the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at Seton Hall University. So I'm sorry that I haven't had contact from her yet, but Kelly, I am checking our chat to see if she has contacted the group through the chat yet. It looks like maybe she has not joined yet.
But while we're waiting, I just want to turn it back to Migs for a moment. Thank you so much for putting that link in the chat. But if you don't mind just saying a minute or two about that report and the call to UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet.
So the United Nations actually has not, oh, can you guys hear me? Sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah, not to take up more space. Sorry, folks. The United Nations actually has not visited China for human rights issues since 2005. And that means that there has been no UN envoy that's been in Tibet to check out exactly how the situation has been unfolding. So a few months ago in December, Tibetan Action Institute actually came out with a report using numbers that were collected from Chinese government official paperwork and official documentation that showed that at least 78% of all Tibetan children inside Tibet have been forced to go to colonial boarding schools, Chinese government state-run boarding schools, and any parents that basically try to not go to these colonial boarding schools are forced out of government like health programs. They're coerced by local authorities to attend, and effectively they have been physically destroying all the Tibetan language schools in like these nomadic areas. And so it's basically choosing between completely being off the grid and not giving your child access to education, or being forced to send your children to these colonial boarding schools, your children, some as young as 4 years old, to effectively be indoctrinated by like Chinese government propaganda into molding these young children into like the perfect Han Chinese, Tibetan, like I guess like prototypes. And so there's actually a petition to call on High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, to visit Tibet during her scheduled visit to China, or at least postpone her visit so that we can speak to her team about how to effectively target these colonial boarding schools to make sure that children in these boarding schools are being protected, and that their conditions are not abysmal. And even if their conditions, sorry, real quick, even if these colonial boarding schools conditions are like top grade, like 1,000,000%, like these kids are, enjoying great food and like high technology, it's less about that. And it's more about the fact that they're using it to effectively erase Tibetan identity and Tibetan culture, because in these schools, like Mandarin is like the main source of language. And they actually have something called like 5 + 2 = 0, which means like if these children are being sent home on the weekends, it's ineffective, because when they go home, they're like being immersed back into Tibetan culture, and that's bad for the program. So that's honestly how deep it goes. Like they're not even trying to hide the fact that it's an indoctrination program. They say these schools, like one main goal is to, inspire Tibetan, like young Tibetan children to embrace their like Chinese identity. So thank you so much. The petition is in the chat. If people could take a look and hopefully spread it to their networks, we would really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mix, for that additional information, and we'll include that link in the follow-up materials. I want to turn it back over to Michael to talk some more about the Syria action.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to talk about the family of Rania Al-Abbasi and give you just a little background about her. And I'd like to talk first a little bit about her background. Rania is well known in Syria as a professional dentist, and a very generous one who had a habit of treating people that weren't able to pay for her services free of charge. And she was also known as a very accomplished chess champion and won some national and regional chess tournaments. She and her husband were both arrested on, I think 2 days apart. They came and first arrested the husband, and the following day the security forces came and basically looted the entire household, taking any electronics in their car and any other files and information that they thought might be valuable to them. The following day they came and arrested both Rania and all of her children. And as I said, the youngest child at the time was 3 years old. They have 6 children that were arrested on that day. And no one has heard from any of the families since the day of the arrest. So what we would like to do is, our group is working every month to write letters to the Syrian authorities. It's a challenging case because in most long-term case files like this, we would be writing to Syrian officials in Syria and sending our letters there. But the country, the government is so dysfunctional that it's very unlikely that any letters sent to Syria would actually arrive at those government offices. So we are instead sending letters to the UN office for Syria in New York City. And we are also launching a social media campaign that we are asking all of you to help us with. And we have launched both a Facebook group called Free Rania Al-Abbasi. And we also have a brand new Twitter account that you can use to post things as well and mention the hashtag Free Rania Al-Abbasi. And we're hoping that by people posting photographs of themselves holding a photo of one of Rania's children, that will bring more attention. And we're asking all of you to post such a picture. You'll get photographs in the materials that you get from Kelly for Get on the Bus. And by doing that, we're hoping to increase the impact of this action. I think the fact that the Syrian government is kidnapping children and disappearing them is the most disconcerting part of this whole arrest scheme. So I see that we are joined now by Raja Al-Tali. So Kelly, if you would make her a co-host so that she can join us on audio. And Raja, I have already introduced you, so people should know who they're hearing from. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, can you hear me now? That's very good. Apologize for being late. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for Amnesty for organizing this event and highlight the detainees file, not only in Syria, in other places. I would like to share with you today a personal story, but also a story that is close to my heart, of Rania Al-Abbasi, but also which is like represent hundreds of and maybe thousands actually of detainees in Syria. So when I was 12 years old, my father was arrested, and he was arrested by the security forces, the political security forces in Damascus, and he was disappeared for 1 year, and we didn't know any information about him. And then after that, for 5 years, he was in Hadra prison. And then after that, for 3 years, he was like in the notorious Tadmor prisons. We were lucky as a family, and my father was lucky because after almost 9 years of his imprisonment, he was released. And it was actually the amnesty when Bashar al-Assad took power in 2000. But as a family, we were very happy that like he was released, and we were able to see him again and like talk with him in person. While I know it's not the case for many Syrians, not only at the moment, but also like my father was arrested in the 90s. And some others like were arrested before and after. And as I said, like we were lucky as a family. My father was lucky because even though he was just like a political activist, or like he just wanted to be involved in politics, this is why he was like tortured and also imprisoned. What I wanted to share with you today, that like Rania Al-Abbasi, who is like the case of Rania Al-Abbasi, who is a Syrian dentist and chase champion, has been disappeared by government forces. Like the picture, when we see the picture of Rania and her husband and her children, it's like heartbreaking. It's unacceptable. Now we are in the 21st century, that children who were aged between 3 and 15 years to be arrested by the Syrian authorities. And not only arrested now for more than 9 years, but also their family members, like their grandma and the grandfather, they don't know anything about them until now. And we are talking about 9 years, a child who has been 3 years old now like it is grown up, what they are doing, and how their life has been in the last 9 years is important for their family members and also for Rania and her husband, Abdulrahman Yassin. So it's very important event now we are together today in order not only to remember that like Rania, her husband and her children were detained in Syria and we don't know anything about them, but also that they are the right to know and the right to for their family, her sister Rania Al-Abbasi and her brother as well, like to know where their nephew and nieces are is essential. They have the right to do to know, and also like for their grandparents to stop having nightmares and waiting for their grandchildren. They are children. So Naila said to Amnesty, Rania played chess competitively and for many years represented Syria in international and regional competitions. She raised the profile of the game in Syria and was honored by Basil Assad, older brother of current President Bashar al-Assad. She is a dentist. She was very popular among her patients and colleagues because she is energetic, honest, and very good at her job. Her clinic was successful, but she made sure that she could provide free treatment to those who couldn't pay. Despite being busy with her work and the children, Rania is very social and she always made time for her relatives, her friends, and her neighbors. We, as her family, know her to be kind, generous, and always there to help others. Not just her family, but anyone else who needed her. Rania and the whole family had visas to leave the country whenever they want. But when the uprising started, she didn't want to leave. She thought she and her family were safe because they hadn't participated in any political activities or belonged to any opposition party. They didn't go to any demonstrations, so she thought nothing would happen to them. Syrian, end quote. Syrian military intelligence officer came to Rania Al-Abbasi's home in Damascus suburb of Mashrour Dummar on March 9, 2013, and arrested Abdulrahman Yassin without giving any reason. They returned the following day to confiscate valuables, papers, and the family cars. 2 days later, they came for Rania and her 6 children. None of the family has been heard from since. Despite requests from their relatives, the Syrian authorities have given no information about what has happened to them, where they are, or why they are arrested. The case of Rania Al-Abbasi is very important because it's not giving only the attention of the abuses and the human rights violation against Rania, who is like a well-known figure in Syria as a dentist and chess player, and also her husband, but also for 6 children. 6 children were arrested for 9 years and kidnapped. No one knows where they are. They are children, and it's a one case. It is an important case. This is what we need to remember. I know the numbers of detainees in Syria or people who are forcibly disappeared, more than 100,000 cases in Syria. But each one of them has family, and the importance of knowing where they are, to be in contact with them. This is a basic human rights. And Naila and her brother and the grandparents, they need to know where their grandchildren are, and also their daughter Rania, where she is. And hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, they must know. And this is the role of international organizations and also international community to keep the pressure on on the Syrian regime, their allies, and also the Security Council to make sure that those crimes of detention, forced disappearance, and also torture in the Syrian detention center and in prisons needs to be ended. And also the Syrian officials need to be accountable for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raja. And thank you to Naila and to your brother for joining us here today. We're really grateful for your presence. And we know that today's event is very short, just an hour and a half to hear about human rights situations in Sri Lanka, in China, in Tibet, in Ukraine, in Syria. And so we just want this to be a jumping off point for further action. As we talked about, we will share the links that we put in the chat so that you can take action to share them with your friends, neighbors, fellow activists in your community. And we hope that in 2023 that we'll be back together in person for Get on the Bus. But we're really grateful for all of our speakers, for all of our participants, that we hope that once we share the video, that the video will also reach broader audiences. Some of the situations around the world that we talked about obviously are getting more attention than others. People on the street may have a sense of what's going on in Ukraine, but won't know what's going on with Tenzin, with the political prisoners that we've talked about, Ilham Tohti or Rinchen Tsultrim and others, and may not know what is going on with the Al-Abbasi family. So we encourage you to spread the word, we'll keep updating the Get on the Bus website. And also, if you haven't signed up for our email list, we'll send an email out to everyone who registered, but ask if you want to be on our email list. We won't just put you on there directly, but we'll ask for your permission so that we can stay in touch. We have just a few minutes left, and I know that there probably are some questions. So if anybody wants to raise your hand and come off of mute, if you have questions for our speakers today, we have a few minutes to do that. Great. Hassan.
So he needs to be unmuted.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everyone. I have one question. All time I'm asking myself this question. I need some answer about this question. How to convince the Syrian people that there is a human right? On Syria, there is no any right. This is like a joke in Syria. Do you know 6 children, 6 kids from 9 years until today? We don't know anything if they still alive or not. There is no human right at all. And the problem not in Syria. The problem on the national organization and the responsibility. They don't carry the responsibility to make a pressure to this regime. I need how to convince the Syrian that there is a human right when they listen to my story, to my sister's story. That's it.
Thank you so much for that and for being with us today. And we hope that we can hopefully generate some more action to raise awareness around what's going on with your sister and her family, and to really encourage people to put pressure on the Syrian government and governments around the world to also put pressure. Naila, did you have your hand raised? Do you want to come off of mute?
Good evening. Thank you for Amnesty for choosing my sister's case to talk about. Actually, this is not something not new for the Amnesty, which always standing with the innocent, with very heartbreaking stories. Actually, I've been with the Amnesty in their campaign in 2015. We had a big campaign at that time talking about Rania and her children. Actually, it was this thing. I cannot tell that I'm really disappointed because there is no any response from the regime. All the letters was sent to Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Shari, the Sha'ar at that time, and still sending many years later, continue sending letters, and no response. So for us as a family, we need to know what about Rania and her children. We are talking about children, 6 children, and since Syria signed the right for children and which is already related to the United Nations rights, they should be committed to their joining this group. So how can we make pressure, as Hassan said? Really, we need our voices to raise and to get a result. Not only raising our voices. Actually, we are not stopping talking about Rania since her detention. But for us, no result till now. Yani we actually, I cannot tell really what the nightmares we had. We don't. You hear about Syria, but imagine children raising in that prisons. Where is our children right for education, health, joining their families, presenting their thoughts, all of these rights. We are talking about prison in Syria. Yani, how can we reach our children? To tell you, Layan, the youngest one, was 1.5 years. She was not 3 years old. She was 1.5 years. She was still breastfeeding at that time. Sorry, yani, she's still a very young child. Yani, you cannot imagine how she can survive in that bad circumstances in Syria. Really, I cannot imagine. Yani, if they are still alive, how they will fight for their future. We should bring them back. We should bring them to their family, to their schools. We should bring them to the light. I swear that maybe no one know many things in this life, like sun, like sky, like nature, like everything beautiful in this life. They don't see. They don't even saw during this 9 years. So I hope the Amnesty could find a way to reach the maybe United Nations to really have positive or advanced steps in this issue. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Naila. Raja, did you want to come back off of mute?
Yeah, so thank you, Kelly. I just want to say, Hassan and Naila, it's very, very hard where you are. And I think it's very hard to imagine your position. I was there for 1 year in the beginning of when my father was arrested and we didn't know any information about him. And it was like very, very hard year. And I cannot imagine the pain that you are going through during those 9 years. And also, I understand the frustration with the international framework of human rights. But this is what we have, and I really encourage you and I encourage Amnesty to keep fighting. It's a good fight. We need the children. We need to know the information about the 6 children of your sisters. And I really hope that by working together, we will be able to achieve some information. It's very hard with dictator regime and like the lack of information that's there, but it's very important that people who are in this call to support you and hopefully having like more actions. And of course, thanks for Amnesty for taking the case of Rania as one of the cases that they focused on until we get the information. And I hope you will be able, as we saw my father, that you will be able to see your sister and her family and talk with them, even hopefully like be as heroes for human rights around the world. Thank you.
And I'll turn it back to Hassan and then Michael.
Yeah, actually our target now, not to release the family. Our target now to know the destiny of this family. Now we are worried that the regime killed this family on the time of arrest. Now I need only to stand with us, solidarity, to know the destiny of this family. That is our target. Do you know? After 10 years, now this is the target. Just this is the target. Yeah. And by the way, my father, Rania's father, is detained from 1982 to 1995 without a trial, without any reason. That only he speak and he protest about something by tongue and by words. Thank you.
And I'd just like to add that I want to give a little bit of, okay, can people hear me? I got a message to unmute myself. Okay, but I'm unmuted. When a group like ours takes on a long-term case file like this, it means that we will work on this case every month and we will continue to work on it. Be reassured that we have very dedicated and very creative people working on the case file. And the one thing we will not do is stop working on it. As long as there is an Amnesty group in Boston, there will be people working to resolve this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to everybody who's participated today, and in particular, Naila and Hassan, thank you for sharing your testimony and inspiration with us. We know that, as I said, that today was just an hour and a half, but we hope that it really ignites further action in personal action with your local Amnesty group, with other community groups that you are connected to. We'll be following up by email. We'll share the video. We hope that you'll share it further on social media and directly with others. We can stay on for a few more minutes. I'm going to stop the recording, but just want to once again thank everyone for being here and hope to see you again for Get on the Bus 2023. On behalf of Amnesty 133, thank you to all of the team and to everyone who's been part of today. And we hope that, as Michael said, that we're going to keep taking action until these human rights situations are resolved and as long as we have breath. So thank you again for being with us.